Good evening and welcome to the Halcyon podcast. One of these, I think I'm calling them I'm dubbing them real talk or something along those lines nowadays, because I seem to have a habit of making these podcasts talking on slightly more serious subjects as they pertain to something that I've personally encountered, that I have a point that I wish to make. On this occasion, I wanted to talk about the idea of acceptance, which is kind of a broad term. But what I'm talking about is the acceptance of people. Now, I'm trying to elaborate. I come from a background, personally and socially, of being someone who is probably more often than not a bit of a social pariah. Never one of a crowd, and if I am, I'm the quietest person in the crowd. Get me on my own, and suddenly I'm Mr. Charisma. It's just a very peculiar thing of me being able to express myself when I'm free to express myself. Now, that can often come across as quite arrogant, or shy, or introverted, however the case may be. However, to be honest, with regards to, as it pertains to the idea of acceptance, there are a few people in this world that I accept despite their flaws. There's a few friends I could name on my hand who have personality traits that other people admonish them for, give them a hard time for, and it's interesting to me that those are the traits that they dwell on. The reason why I tend to gravitate towards certain people and I avoid others is the idea of acceptance. They accept me for who I am and what I am. And I think that's interesting because I try my best to accept people for what they are, to look at a person based on their traits and how they carry themselves and why they do that, in order to try and find some meaning and some acceptance in who they are. Now, that might not necessarily mean that we become best buds, we skip down the way together, but by the same token, it allows me to let them crack on with their day doing what they do without giving them a hard time about it. I very rarely get in people's faces about the way they carry themselves or how they act. It's just not what I do. I think everyone's got the freedom to do and say whatever the hell they want. However, this does have a flip side. It has a knock-on effect on the way people treat other people. It's either you accept me for who I am or go fuck yourself. Now, there's a divide I have here. I think that while everyone has the right to say and do whatever they think, within reason, what I mentioned earlier on about accepting people, I'm very cautious about what I say and do to people I don't trust. It's just the way I am. I think unless you let someone in your circle, then you can never really judge them, because they've never had the opportunity to be placed in a position of trust and therefore be judged on how much mettle they have in terms of how loyal they are. So I think that these days, with the amount of superficial acceptance there is, I mean, again, a classic example, how many Facebook followers and Twitter followers do I have? Proportionally, very, very few. Why? Because the people on Facebook and Twitter are people I actually interact with. They're people I see. They're people I speak to. They're people I would talk to in the event that I needed to talk about something. They're not a statistic. They're not a number. In fact, most of those people are probably subscribers to my show. They're the people that love and support me throughout whatever I want to do, even if I'm being quiet or I'm going through one of my weird phases where I just need to be on my own. I need to figure out what the hell I'm doing. People accept that and they move on. And the point of this podcast on this particular occasion is to try and spread a sense of, look, people are going to do what they're going to do. It's difficult to control and say what people do if we live in a society that parades the idea of freedom. Do what you want, say what you want. You have the facility to spread the word about however much you want to talk about to every single person on the planet. Twitter is like a text message to the world these days. But by the same token, we admonish people for actually having an opinion or stating an opinion. Now, there's a podcast coming up very shortly where I'm going to be talking about something that's been nagging me to talk about, but there's a certain sense of anxiety about talking about it, a taboo about talking about it. We talk about the topic of depression, how it affects people, how it makes people treat you. And the idea of acceptance is something that I wanted to touch on because I think it's a broader subject that depression will single in on. But this idea that people need to start accepting one another again. It just seems that people put people in brackets, and unless you fit within my Venn diagram of people I like and people I tolerate, I will not interact with you. And it's sad. It really is. Yes, someone can be an arsehole. Yes, of course they can be an arsehole. Everyone can be an arsehole. But more often than not, they're arseholes with heart. They're people with hearts and minds and thoughts and feelings, and you've got to dig a little deeper sometimes to find the meaning of that. That sometimes also means you got to set aside a little bit of your ego. Maybe not take so much of a hit so much of the time. Me, I'm very bad at that. I've got to admit, if someone disrespects me or dismisses my opinion or doesn't have at least the common courtesy to let me finish what I'm saying when I'm speaking a sentence, common courtesy, silence is the most important part of a conversation, people, then yes, I can be very short-tempered. But as many will attest, I'm the first person to apologise because I accept what I am and who I am, and I refuse to apologise for that. But by the same token, I'll be the first person to come to you and apologise because I think that's the right thing to do. I think people should be allowed to apologise for their mistakes, make amends for their wrongs, and I think you should accept people for that. Does that mean you have to trust them with your lives, the keys to your house or whatever? No, it doesn't. But by the same token, it doesn't mean you should write them off. If more people did that, I think the world would be a slightly better place, but again, I'm maybe living in a dream world, who knows. Anyway, the point of the podcast was, again, to raise a wider point. The next time you see somebody and you don't necessarily understand their motives, maybe take a second, have a think about it, ask them a question, reach out. The worst thing you can do is ignore it and make an assumption. The best thing you can do is reach out and find out for yourself. Worst case scenario, yeah, you find out they're a bit of a... Do you know what? I was going to bleep it, but yeah, I can't even be asked to say it. They're a bit of a, That's the worst case scenario. You're right. Congratulations, you're right. We're all right sometimes. Best case scenario is you're wrong. And you learn something new about somebody. Done that recently. A few people I don't talk to normally, I've reached out, tried to make a bit of a, people know I'm not the most socially outgoing person in the world. In fact, I'm a bit of a, like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, a bit of a pariah. But that's fine by me. It means then people who do stick around are the people that I can afford to trust. I still accept people for who they are, though, and I wish more people would. So anyway, that's this week's, I guess we're dubbing it real talk. Bit rambly, but I think there's a point in there somewhere if you can decipher it, people. Accept people for who they are and what they are. Don't admonish them for it, don't judge them for it. We all got our problems, we all got our little foibles that someone else has to accept about us. If everyone did that, imagine how great the world would be. So, stick around for the next podcast. It's probably going to be something sport related, but then the next real talk, like I said, I'm going to be talking about the subject of depression, my experiences with it, other people's experiences with it, how to deal with it, how not to deal with it. I've got plenty of experience with that. So until next time, appreciate you listening, appreciate you watching the show. Again, thanks to lots of the people that have given Blink a shot. Anyone that's checked out the last couple of podcasts, really, really appreciate it. Stay tuned, and I'll see you guys next time.